All right, if you're in university, payroll, or finance, you've definitely wrestled with one of the trickiest areas out there, the student FICA tax exception. Getting this wrong can be a costly headache. So today, we're going to do a deep dive, break down exactly how it works, and make sure you have what you need to stay compliant. Let's jump right in. So let's kick things off with a puzzle you've probably seen 1,000 times. You're looking at a W-2 for one of your student employees. You see the total wages in box 1, but then you look over at box 3 for Social Security and box 5 for Medicare, and they're either 0 or way lower than box 1. Now, your first instinct might be to think, uh-oh, did we make a mistake? But nope, it's not a mistake at all. It's actually a very specific tax law in action. The entire reason for that difference on the W-2, it all comes down to one little section of the tax code, Internal Revenue Code Section 3121B10. This is the bedrock, the foundation for this entire rule, and really, understanding it is the key to getting student payroll right every single time. So what's the deal with this specific piece of the tax code? Well, it creates what we call the Student FICA Exception. And in plain English, it just means that when a student works for their own school, that work is exempt from FICA taxes. That's both the 6.2% for Social Security and the 1.45% for Medicare. But, and this is a big but, there are a couple of key conditions. The employee has to be a student, and they have to be enrolled and regularly attending classes. But you might be asking, why does this rule even exist? Well, it really boils down to what Congress was trying to do. They wanted to draw a very clear line in the sand between two totally different kinds of relationships. On one side, you've got this educational relationship, right? The job is secondary, it's just a way to help pay for school. But on the other side, you have a normal commercial relationship where the job is the primary reason they're there. The law's whole purpose is to support students, not to tax what is essentially a form of financial aid. And here is a huge point of confusion, so this is really important. This exception is for FICA taxes and FICA taxes only. It has absolutely nothing to do with federal income tax. Under the tax code, specifically IRC Section 61, these payments are still wages, they're still gross income, and they absolutely have to be reported in box 1 of the W-2, no exceptions there. So we've got the law, but how does the IRS actually decide if it applies to a particular student in a particular job? Well, this is where we have to dig into the regulations, which lay out a very specific legal test for us to follow. This right here, this is the exact language from Treasury regulation, and it is the absolute heart of this whole thing. For that FICA exemption to apply, the work a student does must be incident to and for the purpose of pursuing a course of study. This one phrase, that's the gatekeeper for this entire tax break. So what on earth does incident to actually mean in the real world? Well, the IRS is basically looking at the whole situation and asking one fundamental question. Is this person a student who happens to work, or are they an employee who happens to be taking some classes? For this exemption to apply, their role as a student has to be the predominant one. Education has to come first. And the good news is, the regulations give us a pretty clear two-part test to figure this out. First, there's the employer test. Pretty straightforward. Is the organization an actual school whose main gig is teaching people? Second is the employee test. Is the individual actually a student who is enrolled and regularly going to class? You got to be able to say yes to both of these before you can even think about the exemption. Now, because that predominant relationship test can feel a little gray, right? It can be subjective. Thankfully, the IRS gave everyone a much clearer roadmap for compliance, and that roadmap is Revenue Procedure 2005-11. For pretty much any university payroll department, this is the definitive playbook for applying the rule and, most importantly, managing your audit risk. And the absolute best way to think about this safe harbor is with this phrase. It's a shield, not a sword. The shield part means that if you meet its clear objective rules, the IRS basically agrees not to challenge your decision. You're protected. You're safe. But it's not a sword, meaning if you fail to meet the safe harbor rules, it doesn't automatically mean the exemption is denied. It just means you've lost your shield, and now you have to fall back on that trickier, more subjective facts and circumstances test. So what gets you behind this safe harbor shield? Well, the number one thing, the key to the whole thing, is enrollment status. To qualify, a student must be enrolled at least half-time for that specific academic term. Now, the procedure also has a really common sense exception built in for a student's final semester. It lets them qualify even if they're taking just a few credits to finish up their degree.
Now, the safe harbor also gives us a list of definite no-goes. These are the red flags that will knock a student right out of that protected status, no matter how many classes they're taking. If they work 40 or more hours a week, they're considered a full-time employee and they're out. If their job is what's called a professional employee, it requires an advanced degree or they have significant decision-making power, they're out too. And this one is huge. If they are offered career-level benefits like retirement plans or paid vacation, the IRS sees that relationship as being mostly about employment, and they lose that safe harbor protection.
Okay, let's shift gears and talk about something that trips up even the most experienced payroll pros: the tax treatment of federal work-study, or FWS wages. A lot of people just assume FWS money is treated like a scholarship, but that is not correct. Let's put these side by side, because this is where people get tangled up. When it comes to income tax, federal work-study earnings are always taxable wages. It's a payment for services rendered, not a tax-free scholarship under IRC Section 117. But for FICA tax, FWS wages are usually exempt. And here's the really crucial detail. That exemption doesn't come from the fact that it's FWS money. The exemption comes because the rules for getting FWS in the first place almost always require students to be enrolled at least half-time, which means they naturally meet the main requirement for the safe harbor. So you're probably thinking, when would FWS wages ever get hit with FICA taxes? Well, there is one critical scenario you absolutely have to watch out for, especially when you're processing summer payroll. You see, Department of Education rules might let a student keep their FWS job over the summer, even if they aren't taking any summer classes. But the IRS rules are very clear. The FICA exception does not apply during a break of more than 5 weeks if the student isn't enrolled. In that specific case, you absolutely must start withholding Social Security and Medicare from those FWS paychecks. Okay, let's bring this all home. We've covered the law, we've gone through the tests, we've looked at the edge cases. Now let's tie it all together and bring it right back to where we started, that Form W-2. And here it is. This is the payoff. This is why that W-2 looks the way it does. Box 1, nice and simple. It gets all the money the student earned. All of it. The FICA exempt wages, the FICA taxable wages, everything. But Box 3 and Box 5, that's a different story. They should only include the wages that were actually subject to FICA taxes. So for a student who was exempt the entire year, Boxes 3 and 5 will be 0. That's correct. And for that student who worked over the summer without taking classes, only those summer earnings would show up in Boxes 3 and 5, and that's exactly why those boxes don't always match Box 1. Okay, that was a deep dive. Let's pull back up and just quickly recap the absolute must-know takeaways you need to remember to keep your department compliant. Here are the 4 things to drill into your brain. First up, student status is everything. That half-time enrollment is your ticket into the safe harbor. Number 2, service can't be the main gig. Watch out for those 40-hour work weeks and those career-level benefits. They're instant disqualifiers. Third, FWS is always income for income tax purposes, no debate. It's FICA status, though, that hinges on enrollment. And finally, number 4, watch those breaks like a hawk. That 5-week rule for non-enrollment is a major compliance tripwire. So I'll leave you with this one question to take back to your team. Is your payroll system correctly and, more importantly, automatically tracking student enrollment status from the registrar's office every single academic term? Because at the end of the day, making sure that data connection is rock solid, that's the true foundation of compliant student payroll.